And we can see that that is one sort of characteristic of these positive mental qualities. But if we look at worldly things or worldly examples, we see that this is not the case. If we think of warfare, for example, where we are trying to defeat an enemy, even if we are able to defeat 100 of the enemy soldiers, that doesn't mean that our victory is going to be something stable and lasting, right? There could be 100 that rise up again. So in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, Shantideva sums it up that there is no kind of end to the sufferings of samsara, because when we defeat one enemy, right, another enemy arises easily to take his or her place.
But the
interesting thing is that as practitioners, when we talk about an enemy, we're mainly talking about the inner enemy. And the interesting thing is that if we are able to defeat the inner enemy effectively, it will never be able to arise again. So there's an example which uses the analogy of somebody jumping, or the analogy of boiling water, to explain how these qualities of love and compassion and so forth arise within the mind. Yeah. So the analogy goes like this. If you are trying to leap or trying to jump somewhere, once you jump from point A to point B, if you want to jump a further distance, you have to start the process, right? From flexing your muscles and lifting your legs and jumping again, right? The previous exertion doesn't help you with the next leap forward. Yeah. Yeah. So in this way, right, the previous jump that you did is not necessarily benefiting you the next time you need to go from a certain point to a certain point. But with developing the qualities in our mind, like love, compassion, emptiness, and so forth, this is not the case. We don't have to bring forth that great exertion newly each time we want to move with them. In fact, all of the previous times that we arose the love, compassion, and wisdom within our mind, that will make it easier. It will require less exertion to bring them forth the next time.
That's right.
Geshe said that, of course, we go with it's an example, an analogy that is illustrative, not conclusive, meaning that it's not to be taken totally literally. It's trying to illustrate a point. I told Geshe myself, I find this example quite confusing personally. So Geshe says the fact that if I don't find it helpful shows that I'm not a big fan of the Pramanavartaka. I wouldn't say that I'm not a big fan. I just find it a difficult text. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
And so the next analogy that's given is the analogy of boiling water. And the purpose of this analogy is to show that once we start this process of repeatedly bringing forth love, compassion, and so forth, they only get better and better over time. And that is because the foundation is a source of solidity here.
그게 슈체를 매게 또는 기나 그 여름도에 잘 가봐 두르두르만 로그로 왔어.
디스나 카레레디 카네레.
세는 제이테 쳇대야 키소나.
야야.
쳇대.
야.
아니 다시 뭐 슈체를 넣으면 돼. 뉴르뉴르 만들 고무장도 그러와.
야레. 제제. So the point is that once love and compassion are brought forth to their most sort of powerful expression, they are inexhaustible, which is the opposite. It's an opposite illustrative example of water. When which it is brought to its hottest point of boiling, it can't maintain that for long, right? Because eventually the water will evaporate.
다 던지지 장아로서 당에 된다 가르치고 아로서 세계 예대 다 부수 받던지지 요아레스 다 대벽에 공부시하나 계속 전부 간디스 요아 대시고 요아레스.
So all of these examples are to show us the unusual kind of quality or the unusual characteristics, I could say, of these positive mental qualities, which are something that become stable, inexhaustible with this factor of habituation.
다 된다서 야첨보지라 야첨보스라면 다 된다도 요아르다 오겐게 라그러와
알레
참만 논데가 놀라 빼나 숑바도 니지 다 숑바도 니지 로드시고 요마레 뭐다바도 비시라 돈이도 비시라 되어지 취체는 로와데 나는 내절 빼줘야레스 빼줘야레스
알레
될다서 뭐도 요아레스.
So one of the points in this text of Pramanavartaka, or the treatise on valid cognition, is looking at two types of wisdom. The wisdom realizing impermanence and the wisdom realizing emptiness. Gonda taksa kareje?
뭐다바도 비시라도 돈이도 비시라 슈체를 쳐는 돈에 다 할레비다 체 도본도 그러와 된 로야 된 내절 빼줘야레스.
내절라 빼줘야레스.
빼뺀 내줘야레스.
Ale. And so this wisdom realizing emptiness and this wisdom realizing impermanence, and how when these are developed they increase and increase and increase to the state of a perfection, is used making an analogy with attachment, actually.
다 데려다서 뭐도 요아르는 내줘 되고 된 슈체처럼 로코로 주야면에 다시 맞은 로토를 로야요아레스.
And so because that example is made, right, on the debating ground, there will be a kind of this doubt that arises between the Sangha, which is that if we are using attachment as an analogy for how that wisdom realizing emptiness and impermanence develops, does that mean that an attachment, when it is brought forth repeatedly with strength, also becomes inexhaustible, like those wisdoms? And then the question arises, well, attachment we classify as a klesha, right, as an affliction. And so then we always speak about an affliction in terms of something that cannot reach a state of perfection due to its faults. In fact, it is something that is diminished.
다 대차 토지는 나와도 말레스 다 개발 봐서 개발시거든. 하고 쇼 틈비빼. 그래서 나오지가 빼요아레스.
And so the answer that it gives in the commentaries is that this example, once again, is illustrative. It is not exclusive, meaning that the example is being used to try to get our mind to a certain understanding, but not because the example matches up completely with what is being illustrated. But what's the similarity then between the attachment and these two types of wisdom? That attachment starts out as an ember, right? As something that is not very strong, but gradually becomes something more and more overpowering. So how does attachment work in this way that's similar? Well, the person or the object that we're attached to, we see it, right? We might see that person or that thing that we're attached to, and then we can't get it out of our mind. And then we start to fill in all of the positive things, like what a nice shape, what a nice color or complexion, what nice kind of characteristics it has. And by thinking about this again and again, the attachment completely infuses our mind. And we maybe even are overcome. It stays there for a very long time.
다 거의 야진도에서는 뭐도 다 타심밖에 자도 말했더니 야진도야를 빼 라파 릴라보진도 왔어.
So attachment cannot reach a stage of perfection because it's a klesha. It is an affliction rather than a positive mental quality. But the way that it begins as something small and becomes more and more stable and eventually infusing the mind, this is a bit similar to these two types of wisdom.
다 던지진다고 야에서 빼줘버려마도 배도 타심만로 유업이 빼버리고 말해.
So when the Pramanavataka is saying these things, it's not saying that attachment is something that can be perfected, but what it is saying is that this process of habituation and foundation is similar.
그래서 다 네테 가르치기 요랑아로서 세계 체린로도 그세는 뭐도 세계 보게 예된로도 다 시도 예된로도 시작이야.
So this is important for us to understand because we speak about Buddhism as a science of the mind, and we also understand that a big part of our practice, of our cultivation, is recognizing these positive mental qualities as well as the unwholesome minds and learning how to work accordingly.
다 지케레멜라 마티빙 안도 기워지 그건데 기워용알 기워시 비가 좀어져야 제도 돼야 보시 그건데 왔어.
And if we want to maintain a kind of consistency in our dharma, we need to be able to to maintain a happy mind when we practice. And one of the ways to do that is to see these traditions of mental development as something fun, as almost like a game or an exploration of the mind.
다 시고 돈바서 쓴거야. 시 내서 조조를 때문에 먹어가지. 너무 세근로도 그 때문에 다도지 시소나더니 다 가디나 대롱어야 아이자. 더니 된데기 보지요.
And the holy beings, they have expressed this, and you can also see that they might not take much interest in the external wonders of the world because they understand that actually the biggest entertainment, the most exciting thing, is to observe what is going on within the mind and to work with and cultivate the mind.
야, 다 토마텔에 다 시와레레더니 하지마 이체세를 유담까지 달레레데.
So as we get to our main topic, we will just for a moment cultivate some stillness, some peace by settling the body and mind.
노아중에 연더니 점바중에 가르 이네 니까지로 주도 맞이네 바지라기 선바지.
So whatever sort of appearance or object that the mind may be holding or apprehending, try to just pull back from that for a moment and set discursive thought aside.
세 돈용은 걸로 다 내서나 다 바샤와지 돌레 텐데 만다와지 그 선바지.
As I rest in the mind's fundamental characteristic of equanimity, there is a stillness and a peace that I can settle into.
대명아로서 다 샘세한테 멜론무지 여가르 이나 거로보게 샤토야지 더는 돈도야지 그냥서 야채 보신다.
Our mind can be compared to a mirror, which has the characteristic of being able to apprehend, to reflect any type of object or phenomenon.
아니 고르고 따바로도 말했더니 이나요 저뭐 더는 조야 매번도 되게 어디요 야채 뭐
양교수나.
고로 따비롱지도 말했더니 이나요 고 조야 매바 저지라더니 뭐 더는 다 조야 매번도 되게 됐어.
So when we talk about the fundamental nature of the mind, we can't say that it is permanent, but we know that the mind's bare nature has an element of continuity, consistency.
Koro ka kanga pa tongo deki tani ri deki ina yung koro lana kato do I do zota do tani konyo ma desu.
And the paradox of a mind that can apprehend every shape, every color, every characteristic of any phenomena, but itself is shapeless, colorless, formless.
Senji kuzu ngo sirita ngo desi rapa yung mare tani ta tani yatsi mbuchi desu.
So this is a relative or conventional nature of the mind. Not a coarser relative nature, but a more subtle relative nature that is remarkable.
Tandi se te deshi nila shomba niji ta shira yoga kandi chi ina yung pake tambo ma shewa she nila tani pa kone kondo pe toyaga ko pake laka she toyaga nyatsu chindeus.
The basis of this mind allows us to bring forth love, compassion, and wisdom when they had not been generated before. And once that love, compassion, and wisdom are generated, this quality of our mind allows them to be improved and improved until they reach perfect realization.
Tela tene rung ye ane sadu sali ina yata pake deshi pusu tsupa te toyaga ta koke nyatsu yatsi mbuchi desu.
And because of this mind's fundamental nature, we can bring forth these perfect realizations which can help us bring perfect benefit to both ourselves and others.
Tandigi nipa yopo te ya mayaga cheta ta gabi ngoni ta leka pusu tsupa chigi tela teta yungwa chita sowa tsichi teta yo sopa chicha yela.
So, understanding this power of this mind and with this motivation to bring it to perfection for the purpose of these benefits, I will make single-pointed requests to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, the holy beings, to request their blessings to do this. So we'll recite the prayers. Dembal jom den de jin je ba dra jom ba yon da bar zo pe song ge re ba dong shab su Sheba Jiden Gemba Kebudue Kalo Gyura Lana Meba Ladami Namgi Songye Chom Dende Pegyawa Shakya Tubala Chazelo Chede Kyabzu Chiho Dumba
ba chom den de de jin she ba da chom ba yong da ba zo be sang je re ba dang sha zu den ba de wa she ba ji den chen ba che bu de we ka lo jo ro la na me ba la dong mi nam gi den ba sang je chom den de pe ja wa sha gya du ba la cha se lo che de kya zu ji ho den ba chom den de de jin she ba da chom ba yang da ba zo be sang je je ba dang sha zu den ba de wa she ba ji den chen ba che bu de we ka lo jo ro la na me ba la do mi nam gi ten ba sang ge chom den de pe ja wa sha gya tu ba la cha ze lo che de kya zu ji ho.
Short mandala offering.
So ji begi jo ji me do rom ri ra lin ji ni Chenyen gebe sonam ge jola benjir sange jubar sho chedan sogi chenam la janju bardu dani kyasu chi dagi chenyen gebe sonam ge jola benjir sange jubar sho chedan sogi chenam la janju bardu dani kyasu chi dagi chenyen gebe sonam ge jola benjir sange jubar sho.
So then, in terms of the activities at the beginning and the end, we always say these are important. So in this way, we are completing the activities at the beginning. So whether Kedrup wants to rush the activities at the beginning or not, no, I just want to make sure that we get to the text, but they're very important to pay attention to. So these activities at the beginning, they help us bring forth these positive minds, but they also help us develop a clarity of mind, which is really important, for example, in these practices of visualization, like we're talking about today. So with that, let us develop some of this clarity by just taking the mind's attention to the rising and falling of the breath. So maybe don't worry about counting, but just be aware. Breathing in, I'm aware I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I'm aware I'm breathing out.
류도노도 좀 해버지 위도녀도 파줘서 류야버지 칠레서.
And as we exhale, we can imagine that along with the exhalation, all of the discursive, distracting thoughts are cleared away. And as we inhale, we can imagine that all that is wholesome and stabilizing is breathed in.
디고 농가 류강가 다 좀마야부. 자송 somebody.
I think in this way I have purified the breath and the channels.
텔라테네 테네 세요 그요바. 테네 텔라테네 다 레요. 아니 대화도 다 맞아왔지.
And in this way the mind is calm and vast, and the body is light and at ease.
슈침보 지지테 데즈가 슈침보 발레레 지네도라지.
So next, do a deep exhalation outwards, hold the breath for a moment, and then afterwards do a deep inhalation.
조메비 류도 노도 강가 다 노칼 반자야와 노시.
All the still winds, and along with that the discursive thoughts, have been cleared from the body and dissolve like a rainbow into the sky, into emptiness.
다 롱기테 던전노 칼라트네. 사지도 내 부수 주반변을 야이냐라 소바다 야보 지세다.
And imagine in the space in front of yourself a beautifully smoothed, jeweled ground made out of precious substances like vidurya, like sapphire, and so forth.
rumbuchinta mundragashta shiduta tene chaduta karina dawachi teashimata kange tenite amebachi.
Ornamented with crystal clear water, jeweled trees, and many beautiful things. In other words, everything in this environment arises bliss. There is nothing that gives rise to suffering.
Di tintatani lumbuchi jagiti bitu yuchapusutsuba ane de sampusutsuba.
And in the center of this space is a beautifully jeweled throne held up by 8 elephants, upon which are 3 cushions of lotus, moon, and sun.
Di tindangarasu tembi dobo ane sunji shashatawa kasenduta juyo samachi.
And imagine that the propounder of the doctrine, glorious Buddha Shakyamuni, is invited and seats himself upon this throne.
Lo ye sane ye nyoja di tintatani dutsukuyi bitane luise pumba.
His legs are in the meditation posture, the right hand in the earth-touching mudra, the left hand holding a bowl filled with precious nectar.
Dutsu nawa meba, minji dutsu, chewa meba, chime tseyi dutsu, saba meba, ishigi dutsu, tangarusu kiyagi dutsu kanga dino yobachi.
And there is the medicinal nectar that frees from illness, the deathless nectar that frees from death, and the great nectar of uncontaminated great bliss wisdom.
Diye hula rinpa tongpa tela ta longa jabo mato sonji yenor, ane kandu tu tsishiri ndawa.
Sangi Chukra. And then under him is the first row of these 35 Buddhas that are 6 in number.
Tini me sonji songa dire rinpa achata jawari ngayi kwa alama.
And then so they are blue in color, and then the next one's white in color, red, yellow. So visualize these rows, the first one of 6 and 7, according to the colors of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. Maybe we can put the image up.
야인이 버자다 파마니 저 시빈도와리 주 senje yuzu 강에 때도 대여발다 넘바 마 ombotsumata 가르존아 셰토키가 넘바지.
And then we imagine that visualizing these 35 Buddhas in the space in front, together with us, on either side of us are our mother and our father, and behind them all sentient beings, all 6 types of beings within samsara, but in human form.
Jiba, Deva, Shoniji, Tak, Puzzle, Zubashi, so Tabe, Sita Yobaji.
And imagine that we bring forth the factors of fear, faith, and compassion as we visualize these holy beings to bring forth uncommon Mahayana refuge.
Jichitela Tenitas, Sunjista, Sunjichoteni, Zoshi, Sunjisonga, Tunya Bitone, and Rosos to Kanege, don't that's a Chaba Baba Babaji. Yeah, Sunjitova.
So, hopefully people have access to the file to visualize. So then what we imagine next is that that Buddha Shakyamuni, as well as the 35 Buddhas, melt into lights and nectars, which then dissolve into our body. And they and we can imagine that as the 35 Buddhas and so forth dissolve into lights and nectars and enter into our crown, that those lights and nectars completely purify us of any negativity and defilements, just like a high pressure kind of water would clear out a pipe. And through this purification, then there is no negativity or defilement or obscuration that is able to remain whatsoever. And we can imagine that the 35 Buddhas, Buddha Shakyamuni, melting into lights and nectars and falling like a gentle rain upon all these sentient beings, touch every single sentient being and completely clear away all of their unwholesome karmas and all of the associated sufferings of body and mind. And in this way, we can think that both ourselves and others have achieved a state of uncontaminated great bliss. And think, through this visualization, I've been able to accomplish something meaningful for sentient beings and rejoice with a feeling of joy. and think, through myself receiving these blessings, may this act as a cause for my enlightenment, so that I can lead all sentient beings out of the state of suffering to that supreme liberation. Meditate on bodhicitta.
오다 나좀 주보만 도론도를 가지고 대세면 해서 뭐도 잘 우서서 논이 달래래 저들이 서로 해로왔어.
So of course we have to cover the commentary, right? So we have no choice but to set the meditation aside now and continue. But of course, when you're doing this practice at home, you really want to try to take some time with this visualization and meditation.
다 되면 내저래게 돈이 다 좋아 보이게 땜보 말래 바등이 내서는 말도 안 좋고 그래서
So you want to go in stages, right, of developing this visualization and an understanding of its significance, and that's the way you're going to be able to bring it forth firmly within the mind.
어느 시 동의에 내처라니 다 가로수도 동의와 말아와서 다 하이 메이도 근데요는 동의와 말아 가로수 세대라 내서 만다와질 세대라 세 고로지 저한 듯이 셈바레바 일하셔봐 안디 왔어.
Yeah.
하고서 내가 만다와요. 이제 될게 디기셔봐. 류텔라 류게세 가 만다와요.
So also just to talk a little bit about the colors of these holy beings, we mentioned that they are associated with the colors of the 5 dhyani Buddhas, and these 5 dhyani Buddhas are actually connected with the 5 omnipresent mental factors and the winds of the mind, which have a 5-colored radiance, right, which are the same as the color of these beings.
kumba mekechi kumba menatane ten meyoba meyola kumba mekenyi tak nyondo kadina rawa sedu lyuni.
Yeah. And also we need to understand that these aspects of the mind, right, these omnipresent mental factors, they travel together with the winds that have those radiances, and the winds and the the winds in the mind are compared to the blind person who lacks eyesight traveling with a person who is paraplegic, right, who cannot use their legs. Through the blind person and the physically disabled person traveling together, they can get from one destination to another.
자갈 텐데 요아레스. 아까서와 가네 미 메바치를 톨 미요 기치 kumbandewa 메바치 디자니 거를 갈라서.
Yeah. So then Geshe was saying that, like, you see this actually in India a lot, right, with people that help each other. There might be somebody who lacks sight and another person who isn't able to use their legs, and they actually travel together. So he thinks that's probably where this analogy came from.
아까서와 어딱 나좀 미그 통살은 이네도 머리 미그 전에 마통게 던질 걸었다가 대바요 말이 되는 거 와서 아니라 미그 통게 잡았더니 주스 야참.
Yeah, it money, right?
So
So it actually reminded Geshe of a story of a blind man who used to beg near the Sera monastery, and the monks taught him different mantras to recite, and so he eventually began spending the entire day reciting those mantras, and then his eyes, he was blinded from leprosy, right? His eyes became cured, became healed. He was able to see again.
다 갈레비 나자 뒤잔다고 그건데 통통매가 자가 지야레스. 거기 맞을 가디나 칼라서들 되더라.
제.
다 잡아 로조도 저라서 말이 대지 채도 못 보겠더니 야레. 대지 코스 보트로제 가디나 거로바지.
Yeah, so this blind man, right, as I said, he was blinded from leprosy, and the leprosy was also so serious that he'd lost most of his digits, most of the fingers on his hand, right? Just the palm of the hand was left. But he would kind of put his palms together and ask the monks for alms, and then some of the younger monks, they kind of took affection to him and encouraged him, to take care of his body properly, to wash himself, also to recite these mantras. And gradually he was healed.
다 콜마닐라 메장거라 다 거드네 그냥 가디나 기대서 되라 건저질 고통게 자살지 야체모.
Yeah, and so his favorites to recite were the Mani mantra Om Mani Padme Hung and Guru Rinpoche's mantra Om Ahung Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hung, and it is and from reciting those again and again, eventually his eyesight was restored. And this isn't some story from a book, right? This is something that, happened very recently. It's a real thing. So it shows us also when we engage in the power of mantra, right? The effectiveness of some of these practices. So the thing to understand here is when we talk about the mind or the mental factor, each kind of, each separate mind has its own wind that it travels with. It's kind of compared to the rider and the horse, right? The mind and the wind are always traveling together. And so why Geshe is explaining this is to understand that these visualizations, they are not something random or haphazard, right? Visualizing the 35 Buddhas with this particular method, according to the colors of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, the lords of the 5 Buddha families, is something that is related to the transformation of the winds and the mind. And so the forms that these Buddhas take are tremendously significant for being able to purify negativities and bring qualities, positive mental qualities and so forth, to a state of perfection. And also we understand that all of these practices of purification are similarly profound. Right? So whether we are emphasizing Bodhisattva, whether we are emphasizing the 35 Buddhas, it's actually good, to explore both of these practices if we can. And one of the effects of purification is said to be an increased clarity of mind. Selpo chagire tene?
Siwo chagam duas.
So our lack of clarity in our meditations and our lack of experiences that we would expect from our cultivation can be addressed through these practices of purification. Yeah, so it is really the defilements, right, the negativities that are blocking those things that we seek to develop. Yeah. So for those of you who don't have any unwholesome karma to confess, then of course Geshe would not insist that you do this practice. But for most of us, it's going to be something important. So if you are one who has already purified most of your unwholesome karma, then your engagement with these practices, right, could be to encourage others so that they can come to the same benefits. So if you were paying attention to the prayer that we recited at the beginning, the Sangye Chutsukma, the refuge and the bodhicitta, you will have noticed a sentence that says, "Until enlightenment, I shall always go for refuge." What does that sentence tell you? It tells you that after you reach the point of enlightenment, you don't go for refuge anymore. But does that mean that there is no refuge in the mental continuum of a Buddha? No, it doesn't. There is refuge in the mental continuum of a Buddha to act as a skillful means to encourage others. But the Buddha himself does not require refuge because he has actualized the triple jewel.
내가 레베스가 내가 말했어. 너가 뒤에 쫓아서 시도가 내가 요 말했어.
You'll also remember those of you who are familiar with the story of Lord Milarepa when he was poisoned. You know, the person who poisoned him, she developed a great regret. But he told her, no, I realize that now the time has come, but it is not your poison that is pushing me into the next life. Because I have defeated the inner poison of the kleshas, of the afflictions, there is no external poison that can harm me.
다 손질라요. 드니까 실라는 뒤지라 내가 드니까 뭐 대소비가라. 아니 손질이 다 그때 동봉이 걸어보게 와치시 마다 받아. 저를 사마용스.
Younger son, go ne.
손질도 거듯이 뭐 여기까지라. 뭐지 칼로는 뒤지서 왔어.
Loso.
아니 손질이 다시 제사로 왔어 뭐네.
Yeah.
아니 이나이 당에 와치 되기 때문에 받아. 와치 되기 있어.
So there was another story from the scriptures about the Buddha and his monks were gathered in a vast assembly to be offered food. But the Buddha, through his clairvoyance, came to understand that that food had been poisoned. Now the Buddha, he had defeated the inner poison, so there was no question of that poison harming him. But he knew that it might harm some of the assembly who were of lesser realization. So he said, I'm going to say a dharani, kind of like a mantra, but don't eat the food until I've uttered that dharani.
But
the person who poisoned the food actually had this thought, what a foolish man the Buddha is. I poisoned all of the food and he's not stopping the monks from eating it. Zoom. So actually there is a specific dharani that is said to be able to protect from poison, and it was the dharani that the Buddha uttered at this time. And after that dharani was uttered, the funny thing was that all of the monks were saying that that food was more delicious than what they had ever received before. So it's also to illustrate the power, right, of these things that are recited in terms of the purification and the protection. Yeah. So there's a story about the brothers Vasubandhu and Asanga. And so probably a lot of you are familiar with this story, that Asanga was a great Mahayana Pandita, right? But Vasubandhu, at least initially, he was a big critic of the Mahayana teachings. And then so as a skillful means to try to create a connection with the Mahayana in the mind of his brother, Asanga sent 2 of his students to near where he was dwelling to walk back and forth and loudly recite the Mahayana Sutras. Yeah. So eventually this worked actually. Vasubandhu was a very wise scholar, very intelligent, and from hearing these Mahayana sutras, he came to understand how Mahayana works with cause and effect and the things that were possible, and he began to think, have some appreciation. And so he also began to develop a terrible regret. He thought, this profound teaching of the Mahayana is something that I have kind of denigrated and tried to oppose. And he brought forth a very, very kind of strong mind of regret, and he thought, I need to cut out my tongue. Excuse me. Sorry. Maybe Kedrup has some bad karma related to that. Apologies. Yeah. Yeah, so Geshe said that, if we could have even just a portion of the tremendous regret that Vasubandhu felt at that moment, how useful would that be for a purification, right?
로비인 제바 접어시 송아스
Yeah.
제발 텔타와 이나
Yeah.
나로서 던디 춘주지 와래
yeah.
사이 던다고 지고 시토야 말했어
Yeah, but that powerful regret that Vasubandhu was able to bring forth as part of that purification, it's like we don't even have a dust particle of that. We just have something very small in terms of our regret.
다 대조 가리마시오 알았으니 렌델 버기 이치 때뭐 따다 지금 그 말이다 아니 디빌레는 제바 접어진 거야 말했어
So why is our regret not powerful in the same way? Well, this is related to our lack of familiarity and conviction with the teachings of karma, of cause and effect. Because we haven't become convinced of those, we aren't able to bring forth that same determination. And so Geshe said, don't feel like he's kind of like sitting here critiquing or scolding. He includes himself in this, right? His own practice of regret is similarly lacking. And also, these teachings about the importance of regret are something that's in the commentary about this practice. Yeah. So, actually, someone intervened before Vasubandhu cut out his tongue. I think one of the Sūtra reciters. And they said to him, you don't need to do that. Actually, there are methods through which you can purify your previous misdeeds against the Mahayana. And so they led Vasubandhu back to his brother, Asanga. And so the act of purification that Vasubandhu engaged in was that he composed, they say, 500 commentaries, long and short, on the Mahayana Sūtra that are part of a genre known as Geshe Ngodrup. So Geshe Ngodrup means something like proving the Mahayana as the Buddha's word. So he composed those as his act of purification. And one of those was a text on the Abhidharma. And this commentary on the Abhidharma is studied until this day at the great monasteries. It explains in particular all of the abodes of samsara, how the cycle of samsara continues to perpetuate, and all of the causes that underpin samsara. It's not an easy text, but it is a text which is extremely profound and valuable. And so, like his brother, Vasubandhu sought to have an encounter with the Buddha Maitreya. However, the Buddha Maitreya said, due to his previous criticisms of the Mahayana, that it won't be possible within this life. But if he engages in these acts of purification, it will be possible in the future. And if you are able to accomplish these deeds of purification, then definitely in the future we will be able to meet. So to go back to our text, the title of this text, so in it somehow, I don't know if it's like in the English-speaking Dharma world in general, or if it's more in like the FPMT world, we always refer to this as the text of the 35 Buddhas. But in Tibetan, this text is actually called the Tung Shak. And so Tung means downfall, and Shak means to confess. So it's known as the confession of downfalls. And this is important because Geshe was explaining that this practice is called the confession of downfalls, and it relates mainly to downfalls of the Bodhisattva precepts.
총
정수가.
총수그 춤바지 버거션이라 버거지 중이라
알레 로스.
이게 다 디바쇼비 된다. 조원다고 제지 디니 두자트 말해서.
So the elements of this practice of the confession of downfalls are taken from the various sutras, collected discourses of the Buddha. And it is said that, in fact, the elements of this text, the cause of that, arose from a liquor seller, Changzonggen Pupu. So in the sutra, so Geshe said that he can't remember the names, so he's sorry, but he's quite sure, not 100%, so apologies if I'm mistaken, but quite sure that one of the main sort of reasons that these practices were propounded was from a liquor seller whose child died, and he then began to have regrets about his life, and he wanted a mode of purification. Yeah, so this is contained within the sutras. Yeah. Hagusan. Yeah. Shaksana tupa dawaji. Ale. Ale igungsone. Ale. Okay. So yeah, so it's important to refer to it as the tungshak because this etymology is very important. So Geshe is explaining that the second word shak, which means confession, that this sound or this syllable also has another meaning in Tibetan, which means to create an incision or a hole. So Geshe said the analogy here is you can imagine that there's a plastic cup like the one that his plant is sitting in. And maybe it's filled with an unpleasant substance, but you really need to use that cup for something, right? So what you would do is you would have to somehow either dump it out, or if the top was too small, you'd have to create an incision to get all the gunk out so that the bottle could be used again. Yeah, so the idea is you need to kind of create an exit pathway for the negative thing. We can also think of medical science. If we have something harming our body, like a tumor or something, right? The surgeon is going to need to make an incision before they can remove that from our body. So this idea of shak, right, which is like to create that exit pathway, and one of the last of the four opponent powers, which is the Nampa Sunjinpe Top, which is the power of complete eradication, they are very much connected. Complete eradication means that everything negative that was within, it has been pushed out, right? It has been pushed out so that it can be completely cleared away and eradicated. So we will go to the commentary. Yeah. Okay, Kalpa Tri Chi. Tambo Nipa Sumpa Jipa. So, yeah, okay. So, doing a review to the teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, perfectly complete Buddha glorious conquer Shakyamuni, I prostrate. To the Tathagata thoroughly destroying with Vajra essence, I prostrate. To the Tathagata radiant jewel, I prostrate. Each of these purify 10,000 eons of negativity. So as we recite the names and visualize receiving the lights and nectars from these holy beings, if we have this understanding of the benefits of the purification, it makes it more powerful. Ale. So, to the Tathagata, Lord of the Nagas, so that's the blue one with the white face, I prostrate. To the Tathagata, army of heroes, I prostrate. That is Tongtrachi Kaza.
야, 예, 도라지.
That is 1,000 eons of negative karma.
말해 그 가와르와 두라 야, 예, 도라지. 야.
It wasn't clear last time. I think I should
네.
Okay, so it's 1,000 for each of those two.
대송아.
Yeah.
다 대지셰바 빠지라 샹솔 레베.
Yep, 대신셰바 파지라.
빠지라 샹솔 대지셰바 르치 메라 샹솔 와.
Yep.
어 대니가 가와 니동.
Nitong. And so then to the Tathagata, delighted hero, and to the Tathagata, jewel fire, I prostrate. According to the commentary, these each clear away 2,000 eons in vengan of karma.
다 대지셰바 르치 다게라 샹솔로 서 가와 둔라지.
And to the Tathagata, jewel fire, which is the final one here, this is said to purify 8,000 eons of negative karma. Tisgo tanda one chik ni sum jinga trukdro soarwa dene
디 가르세고.
tomba chomne de dang yamdurwa.
주도 디닌도서.
Yeah, dene tsushingom puden so soarwa.
다 대치도 마셔.
So that's the first row of the 6 plus Buddha Shakyamuni.
다 대지셰바 르치 다게라 샹솔로 가와 제와들와. 아니 가와 둔라지.
Rinchen mela chasolo, right? Then the Dejin Chiba the young Jeribe.
대치버레스. 다리 이제 안 소스 데모서 보면 되겠어. 주파도 더마니테 두라니.
Yeah.
하고서라.
하고서.
아제와.
Jepa, right?
가와 두라지.
So to the Tathagata jewel moonlight, 8,000 eons of negative karma.
그래서 다 가와 대지셰바 통화 대야라 샹솔로 가와 찌게 디바.
Kawachik. To the Tathagata meaningful to see, I prostrate. 1 kalpa, 1 eon of negative karma is purified.
그래서 다 저바르치 다이거다네 초명가이 여기 디바 공무인 바데.
To the Tathagata jewel moon, this purifies specifically negative karmas related to the 5 misdeeds of immediate retribution, sometimes called the 5 heinous crimes.
매매 야 나로서 다 네트미야 티사와이사 릴라보디와 마르와스 다 이나요다 거로 이치루고도 알레트니시 소노토네 다 가보서 내가 제레스.
Rinchen Daola Chatsalo Samengagi. So Geshe said that the commentary is explaining all of these various modes and benefits of purification. To ask for logical reasonings for each of these is something that is maybe difficult. We have to understand that karma is subtle, and so we try to just bring faith according to the Sūtra.
페나 손지 조데 내가말 나타 지하나 주든 다워티케서 요마르와 다 거로 버게 뇨레셰피카 로베니까 센제니까라 대지셰바르 진님보세하지 논좀을 배바레스.
So there was at the time of Buddha Shakyamuni, at the time when the Buddha was still a sentient being, he was known as Rinchen Kare? As a Rinchen Ningpo, so precious essence. Karegane. Ale. Ale. And so, I'm sorry, so the Buddha at this time was a sentient being, and the presiding Buddha, the enlightened being of that period, was known as precious essence. And the being who became the Buddha, for the Buddha at that time, developed a real kind of regard and appreciation. So he circumambulated him many, many times. It is said that he circumambulated the Buddha of that time period for an entire week without resting or sleeping. And so, because his practice of circumambulation was so concentrated, and because it was based on such a kind of uncontaminated admiration, respect, and faith in the presiding Buddha of that time, it is said that he was able to purify 90 eons of negative karma. Tongwa Dunyula. So then it is said that, from that action and from remembering that name, that purification was possible. So that shows us a little bit about how this liturgy is functioning.
다 걸어서 노바테 강강가로서 디바타야 그체 노바테 바기사 오다테 버게 오 노만다만다 지제 치하로
So every Buddha within this configuration of the 35 takes on a specific physical kind of aspect and attributes to enable us to purify specific amounts and specific types of negativity.
오다 대지 미소노 또는 오 걸어 버게 베티게 두어서 존이라 오다 이치도 가리나 걸어 지제 치 아용이야.
So if we understand the purpose of these various manifestations of the figures here, this can help us to bring forth faith and the efficacy of the practice.
오다 때는 디스와 다 지지 바데 점마메바 대지자바 점마메바라 상서로 생
말에 ngazo 통화 dünyula chasalo dene rinshin dawala chasalo ale mare ale ngazo kawadu deshin sheba jima mepa
그렇지 나와이 처음에가 레다 차송아
ale loselo
소소 때문에 가래
so nga truk chaso nguma di 통화 dünyula karere
까와지
Kawachi. So the Tathagata, meaningful to see, I'm sorry, I think I got confused. So that is 1 eon of negative karma. The Tathagata jewel moon, that is the 5. So the Kasakala joining that is clearing away the 5 uninterrupted negative karmas. I told Geshe, when you jump around, it confuses me. So the Tathagata jewel moon, that purifies the 5 uninterrupted karmas. And so next we are on the Tathagata stainless one. Drima mepa kariri.
다 점마메바 녜이 초명아 로마레 대도 냐와
These are the 5 negativities similar to the 5 uninterrupted karmas or the 5 heinous crimes. So they aren't those 5 heinous crimes, but something similar to them.
그렇다 지금 다 주니바 대지세바 빠질라 상서로
So the next one we come to, which is the 12, to the Tathagata bestowed with courage.
셰동 그네로이 디빌레 가르 이나 거로 당도야
Shedun?
셰동 콘도
Shedang. Oh, so these are purifying. Tathagata bestowed with courage is able to specially purify negativities related to the arising of aversion or anger.
다 쩌선바 준비 대지세바 준발라 상서로 잘라바 이는 대처가 그네로이 디빌레
Ah?
대지세바 준바 대처가 쩌선바라와 대처가 그네로이 디바
So to the Tathagata pure one, so pure one is able to purify those negativities arising connected with attachment.
준비 실라 상서로 선에 가와치 디바 당도 그래요
Kabakatsa truk.
가와추 추지
Chichi. To the Tathagata bestowed with purity I prostrate. This is once again 10,000 eons of negative karma.
대지시아바 철라라 상서로 가와 뚱게 디바 다 그래스
Tongchachi. So to the Tathagata water god, this is 1,000 eons of negative karma.
칠리라라 상서로 선에 가와 나두게 디바 다 숨은디와스
To the Tathagata god of the water god or deity of the water god, Tongchangae. It's
가와 뚱랑아
5,000 kalpas or eons of negative karma.
손지 찌디바 대지시아바 빠존라 상서로 서 가와 나두게 디바
Ngato. To the Tathagata glorious goodness, again 5,000 eons of negative karma.
다 대지시아바 젠데발라 상서로 가와 던지 디바 다 그래스
To the Tathagata glorious sandalwood, so that is 7,000 eons of negative karma.
리스와 아니 가와 뚱르와
Ziji Tayela.
대지시아바 지지타이 리스위
Yep.
가와 던도사서 어때 가와 던지 디바 다 그래스
Je. Dene di drosun. Dene di ola.
다 녀시바 들어와
Yep.
다 대지시아바 야발라 상서로
Ale. Ziji Tayela chasolo yang kelpa dun.
가와디야
So then, dun, right? So then to the Tathagata infinite splendor, that is also purifies 7 eons of negative karma. So sandalwood and infinite splendor, both 7 eons of negative karma.
다 녀시바 야발라 상서로 선데 녀와드는 미사금만도 배체마바 토그레 사시마도
To the Tathagata glorious light, the commentary here does not explain the particular purification that takes place. It only says that there is a great purification.
다 때스 만다와요 소소를 다 니타니 그때나 하고서 년저와르지 당도 그래 슈 첨보르지도 못 당도 그러와
Ale, loso.
디바
Yeah.
슈 첨보르지도 못다 드네 오 갈래 야포차나 소마차도
So these different kinds of modes of purification and recollecting them are to help us to clear away the heavier negative karmas first, and then tambo chembo dinso. and then move on to the more and more subtle ones.
다 알리 녀시사티 지하기 녀시바던 로송아서
Yeah. So in this way, we will stop this part of the commentary there at the Tathagata glorious light.
디세 차소 매나 차소 요는 뒤샤 차소 돈이 디바샤 소노.
Yeah.
차소 매는 손지 성을 샤사 이치데만데. 디디네를 때는 소타서 좀 배주소. 뭐다 네스지 하레스.
So another thing when we do this practice at home, right, is sometimes we are pressed for time. So we don't necessarily have the time to recite the name or prostrate and visualize the lights and nectars coming from that individual Buddha. So what we can do is actually recite this or bow this relatively quickly to all 35. Then we can imagine at the end receiving those lights and nectars and the benefits of purification collectively.
아고사라와 오니 와다 티니 열라 드미고리 타네 손지 신성을 샤자사소나 드네 열라 드도 멘다도 차소 대체 드즘베주여 보체.
And then ideally, after we have done the recitation of the names in that visualization, we will offer the 7 limbs to this assembly of Buddhas.
하고사라와 아니 나 그이셔라 숭게셔라 다 그수투석셔라 말레바타 소솔파 토송 som바타 대지 때문에 그거서레스.
And then imagine once again lights and nectars descending from these holy beings in kind of 3 waves to bestow the blessings of holy body, holy speech, and holy mind.
드네 야첨보여 가시에 온 뭐야 릴라웍 등에 당한 좀 만들이 인자마다 와서 디바샤 베칼 또 론소게 유한다 오지 우야레스.
디바야보장송 기타.
따따다 말로도 가리나 또 안다마다 요하러 와서.
And so it is said that some who engage in these practices of purification with faith, they will be able to receive a sign, for example, a dream, that some of that purification has been successful. But don't be greedy and think, well, I'm not getting any signs of this, so I don't want to do it, right? That won't happen for everyone, and this practice is still really effective regardless. So Geshe is actually reminded in a commentary that he is reading for the Chakra Samvara class. It is by a great commentator called Akusherab Gyatso, and he's kind of considered like one of the preeminent commentaries on Tantra. And so what he says is that in regards to the practices of purification, right, in terms of the unwholesome karmas that we have amassed, they are similar to the volume of Mount Meru. So when we purify a single rock from that mountain, how can we expect to have a sign, right? So don't be too attached to those signs. And this makes sense, right? Because when we think about the teachings of past and future lifetimes, that means we could accumulate any number of negativities in countless previous rebirths. We know that the bodies of all of the rebirths that we have held within samsara, the surface of the entire earth would not be able to fit those bodies, right? So there's many, many karmas to deal with. Yeah, so we talk about in terms of achieving enlightenment, right? To become a Buddha, one needs to accomplish, or at least the equivalent of 3 incalculable eons of merit. But it is tens of thousands of eons that we have spent wandering within samsara, right? So that story is very complex. And actually, we shouldn't hear like 3 incalculable eons and get discouraged. What we should do is develop an understanding of the benefits of cultivation so that we can take joy in cultivation. And then, even if it takes 10,000 eons of practice for us to get where we need to go, we will do this with a contented, happy mind. And think about it, right? practice leads to the benefits of both temporary and ultimate happiness. So if we are continuously practicing, even if it takes a long time to get to the final goal, we'll continuously be establishing causes and experiencing results of happiness.
다 들이 잡아도 딜레 쩌선바도 바차와서기 만대자기.
So Geshe-la's idea today is he wants to finish the 13th chapter of the 400 verses, if that's possible. So what he plans to do is to go through a little bit quickly, but give an overview of the most important points.
같이 제와도 뇽도뇽도 요아기자 떼스 갈래 운도 되네. 다 우가조 그때 갈래 오지만 된대 이거.
So within these verses, of course, there are some verses which are a little bit difficult to understand. So what he wants to do is to go over the general meaning, and then hopefully, later we can come to a maybe further discussion if warranted. So also, don't think that Geshe is putting aside 400 verses once we get through this chapter. His idea is that every year we will do at least one of the at least one of the chapters of this text every year. So this is something we will revisit. So Geshe said that you may be asking, okay, well, after we finish this chapter of the 400 verses, what's going to be the side topic that we do? So his Geshe-la's idea for the side topic was the Sūtra of Long Life, the Tsedo, sometimes called the Amitayus Sutra, but Geshe said that he's going to put that idea to Manoshi, and actually he said Manoshi's the boss, so she can decide if we will go to that one or something else, but he'll suggest that one and a couple of others. Yeah. And so don't feel that like we're kind of like done with this, and that's the end of 400 verses. So the idea is every year we will go through one of the Rabye, one of the sections. I believe there's 14. So then, as we go through verses 3:10, since it was produced as something visible, chupa dang chuchikra. Since it is produced as something visible, it is of no use at all to the pot. As with the production of visibility, it lacks even the entity of existence. The eye, like the ear, is an outcome of the elements the eye sees, while the others do not. Certainly, therefore, the subduer has said... Oh, okay. I'm not supposed to read each verse. Sorry, I'll just tell the meaning. So verses 10 and 11, what it is explaining is that every sort of sense consciousness and what it is perceiving is definitely connected and related to a karma, a cause of the one who is perceiving. Yep. Yep. So in some non-Buddhist schools, it's a little bit strange. What it is saying is that when there is the observer, right, when the viewer is viewing the viewed object, so for example, that plant, it is a kind of consciousness of a viewer, which is somehow creating that object which is seen. And so it's kind of holding on to an element of inherent existence, which means that the viewer and the viewed, that somehow the viewer is creating the cause for what is viewed. So this is refuting that, right? There has to be lego giretonda. There needs to be a karma, right, which is leading to the arising of that appearance.
Yere Tong, Ki Tong, Hachon, Nieto, Chirin, Jesuite, give a chetem. Kate Zuto Mindon, Swing, then Gayamuna, Tajan Devan, and Yeshawan, Zamban, Jos, Ota, Penamiga, Yelatawa Teacher. Yelatawa Teacher, and a Migo Umbotica Yelatawa Teacher, Habasarawa.
Yeah.
And Michigan Yel Mataving Aroni Tagare, Gila Tagare, Tatanivitoares, Chato.
I said, well, show. Kumasu.
Migo Umboti, Michigan Yelatawa Teacher, Migo Umboti Yel Tagara. This is Chipa Tagare, telling Asha, you are, yes.
Cut it to the cheap.
Migo Umboto, Mig Shipani.
Yeah. Ale. So these verses are talking about a question that arises when we talk about the sense power and the sense consciousness. So if we talk about the I sense power and the I sense consciousness, when they are viewing that plant, are the sense power and the sense consciousness able to see the plant at the same time, or is this something that happens in different increments?
Ale. Migo Umboti, Yel Mataving Aroni.
Yeah.
And Michigan Tatsuna.
Then they won't
both.
So one argument that is made here is that if the I consciousness and the I sense power are seeing it pretty much at the same time, then the I sense power is kind of rendered irrelevant because the image is going to the I sense consciousness right away.
Oh, there. Tajasan Batika Tarimbogi Tanis, Kasi, Roji Chitabayina. Tarimbogi, the Taritu Yella, Tawal Chavaman.
So 313 is looking more to the actual object held by the visual consciousness. And it is in a way refuting the inherent existence of forms. And what it's saying is that there would be no difference in clarity between those objects that are far away and those objects that are closer, if these things were inherently existent, if they existed from their own side.
So
a lot of these reasonings that we see in these verses, they are trying to refute this problem of holding to some type of inherent existence.
Jinza Bachi, Shanan Jama, Mila, Noshi, Machine, Noshi, Lamatam, Nika, Zula Yamana, Tetakin, Chata, Kademashi, Tona, Kungima, Mawa, Pom, Jogate, Mama, and Dona Gongia, Kungi, Tela, Shipashi, Kadete, Danzana, dying, Po, Dai, Tombo, Kungin, Dana, Jumba, Maguna, Rivers, Chatan, Zambanja. Chasi Dadamajabati, Badamaj Dame Payuda, Tadani, Janatan, Marie, so.
Nazukalist.
How did the Chamaga? Umbo no don't Tase, Sontego, Cheshabaja Teda, E, don't Sondana Tata, E, Me, Cheteme, Nawa, Natuma, Kunshi, Egypt, Major, Major Tanzamba, Ten, Chicken Nojalan, the shipping Boshishago, Muto Zula, Teni, Jamaja, the Shawan, Kula Yabani, the Jamashishago, Mariso, Kunse. Kepa Satina, Mosama Bangameba, Tizi, Unto Tendal, Yasisha, Chishi, Game Colo Tabato, Malo Jama Chadato, Kuna, Noge Trachato, Mijitito, Sipa, Chus, Najaba Jabali, Umbo the Tegaba, Goma Temba, Raji, Chesambago.
So in this way, Geshe has given at least the oral transmission. We have finished up to verse number 13.
This one, that Tenda Karasungu to Senate, so what eh? Narusugo, Mishiga Yelatawati, yeah. Yetong de to ta yendamada no de yendamada tong de kanga lolo roji me bitini shipayo roji me yeyo roji me bitini tene no at kanga yung yare.
So what this essentially is arguing is when we look at the I consciousness as well as the objects that are being viewed, both the functioning of the consciousness and the sense powers themselves, as well as the apprehension of that object, are possible because both the viewed, the object, and the viewer, the consciousness and sense power, lack inherent existence. That's how this interface is possible.
Oh, you do it, you got roji mepa, Jaman Noji. Pema washing to us, Jama, Trova, Milom, Tamatama Shulokati, Pechu.
So both we could say that both the object and the object possessor, so both the subject and the object, they lack inherent existence, similar to dreams, illusions, mirages, and so forth. And that's what's being spoken about in verse 325. And so that sort of solidity or the stability of that object is an illusion. It's like the fire, what are the people called that play with fire? You know what I mean. The torch thrower who swings the torch around and around. It's like I'm trying to explain stuff to folks. He's swinging it around and around, and it seems like there's a circle or a ring of fire, right? But there's only one torch. Yeah. And it's similar with an echo, right? There's only one sound that is initially made, but it sounds like, because of a wall or a cave or whatever, that there is a repeating sound. So, of course, these are, in verse 325, the many beautiful kind of analogies, illustrations of the emptiness, which is the lack of inherent existence. One caveat that Geshe gives to you is that different schools of emptiness, so for example, the Madhyamaka Sautantrika also use these examples, but the Prasangakas have a different refined way of understanding them. So we understand that when one is able to understand that both the subject and the object lack inherent existence, and that this is how they are able to interface, the more understanding will become refined. The more that one is holding on to one or the other or both, having some element of inherent true existence, the more and more faults will emerge in one's understanding. So Geshe said, in this way, hopefully he's given you an overview of this particular chapter of the 400 verses. He realizes as this side topic we haven't been able to go into it thoroughly, but hopefully this will be a cause to do so in the future. So that actually covers everything that Geshe had planned for today. So let us dedicate the merits nicely, and afterwards, if you have to get on with your day, please do, but otherwise, very welcome to hang out for questions.
Changju Zenju Rinpoche Maje Bana Jejo Che Chewan Yomba Meba Yang Gone Gonde Bewa Shu Toni Tawa Rinpoche Maje Bana Jejo Che Chewan Yomba Meba Yang Gone Gonde Bewa Shu Jambe Bao Jeda Jemba Don Gondo Zambo Deyon Dejente Deda Gonjo Jeso Dalo Chir Gewa Dida Tangje Radongo Duso Shebe Gyawa Tangje Gi Ngowa Gongla Joda Ngaba De Dagi Gewe Tsawa Dogonjo Zambo Jeji Radongo
Gewa Shibini Patela Teneta Kami Kangi, Jasomang Bata, Silio in the Passionilla, Somboya Boshetoyaji.
Through the powers of the virtuous karmas that we have accumulated, may all of those who possess unwholesome minds that would harm sentient beings, may these thoughts be completely cleared away, and may they only have thoughts of benefiting others. May all diseases, wars, and calamities, degradations related to the imbalances in the four elements, through these merits, may these be completely cleared away.
Sudu sui na itibile pash dani la dawa timba to tawa no jita page se abo chaya childo.
And it is said that anyone who had previously engaged in negativity but confesses and purifies is like a moon which is unobscured by clouds. Through these merits, may all beings be able to enact this purification.
Marusuru sosai na ita kale jaya teta page de pusuba chi chet jagyo isa te page nyole tashimba chino ya ta page jala.
Because I have engaged in today's positive activities with this motivation to be able to be of benefit of others through these merits, made my qualities to be able to benefit them perfectly flourish.
Oh yeah.
So we'll pause there and we welcome questions.
다들이 아주 디디서 가야지 저 때에서 와서 오주 남만다 때에서 너나 오 지지는 사바이는 때에서 그게 가워야 보이면 시켜다
Candice.
진짜 봐 사와지
야야.
유진다 오 다른 거 남는 거 주나
Yeah.
오 소소소 오 저만다 와도 오 대한들이 밤을 치치다
Yeah, so Geshe said that he likes to cover things thoroughly, but also like today with the 400, he also likes to sometimes move to a different text, not because one text or another isn't valuable, but because especially with these side topics, if we use these side topics to explore different texts, that might touch the capacities and affinities of folks in a different way. Yes.
야 저와 도쇼
Very quiet. Oh, there's hands. Okay, yes, go ahead. I don't see who was first, so whoever would like to go first. Geshe's like, what's wrong with Kedrup's eyes? There's a lot, is the short answer. There's a lot wrong. Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Now I can, yep.
Okay, so I have a question which is not related directly to the teachings, but I'm stumbling across two terms, and I would like to know what is the difference, respectively, the relationship between Dharma Dhatu and Dharmakaya.
Yes, so the relationship and the difference between Dharma Dhatu and Dharmakaya. Chuku dang chuying kepar kandes chikres.
메치크도 치도 제와 침보르was 아니 시안도 치 세나도 당 안졸아요 아레스 세계도 많이 강가치 치치치레스
So the Dharma, so there's a big difference between Dharmakaya and Dharma Dhatu. So the Dharma Dhatu, or the Chuying, this is actually something that all of us possess right now. And in a capsule, we could say that semgi tombaniro. We could say that it is the mind's emptiness.
안졸라더니 예송 지방 안졸 강가요 아레 사이트 저 보치시요 할때
Sangya yoris kimsenchiro.
메메메 안졸 강가를 송지 아레스 예송 지방
Ale. Las. Labgen konso de la tenila.
콘서 세가 말레스 안졸 요 아레 잘라요 아레스 이지가
Las.
어때레스
So, you know, some say that actually we possess a Buddha within us. And we could argue that part of the reason they say that is because of this dharmata, the mind's emptiness. Gonda chikla tegro. Nazo sengi tombani dang sangi sengi tombani chipareti. Gimsentire.
메타티치 더 마치스 수진을 다 거서와 어 델리 예송 지바 메야 보다 그래
Yeah.
예송 지바 도모네 송지
Yeah. So some people say actually we are a Buddha from the beginning. It's related to the fact of that dharmata, the mind's emptiness.
조바 체제가 너나 돈비 수지 점해봐 수지 돈버텔 저거야 점해봐잖아
And some people say actually that Buddhahood is causeless. Buddhahood is causeless. The reason is because they are thinking of this dharmata.
민 조바 체제는 요아레스 연다 라게 좀 돈비 수지 점해봐 시지
Kawala.
조바 체제
Jambe Senju. So in expressing the names of Manjushri it actually expresses the causeless Buddhas. You'll see this term. That's what that is referring to.
다 소지 있어야 되지 쿠쿠쿠 요아초요 그래서 어제 전도 왔어.
Chuying.
나도 세계 또 많이 소지를 해야 돼.
And so that it's with this understanding of this Dharmadatta that this is a Buddha that they would say that, this causeless Buddhahood.
다 대알게 좀 대다는 가지고 강가려 하래. 세계 지이잖아.
But the Chuying or the Dharmata is something that all of us beings possess.
다 이나요 치클은 좋아라. 다 디글 로버게 좀 강가 파송아 마저는 코치크 좋다고요 말했어.
But for that Dharmata, for the mind's emptiness to become the Chukku, the Dharmakaya, for the Dharmata to become the Dharmakaya, what we have to do is remove all of the adventitious defilements from the mind. Otherwise, that won't be possible.
치클은 인로요. 세대고 타마타마 치크 좋아로 그래. 세계 또 많이 되고 전에 치크 좋아로 그래.
In fact, some divide Dharmakaya into two, and one is the aspect of the mind that reaches Dharmakaya, and the other aspect is the emptiness of the mind itself, which reaches Dharmakaya.
그래서
Did that answer your question,
Yeah. Thank
Venerable
you.
Doma?
Thank
Okay,
you. Very,
good,
very
good.
helpful. Thank you very much.
그전에 연구도 와서.
Yeah. And so if you want to look at this a little bit more, Geshe suggests you look at the presentation on the four kayas, the four bodies of an enlightened being.
손절 끝서마도 배제마도 치클로 그쪽에서 리라고 배제 돈으로
And often those four, right, we leave out the Svabhava kaya, the nature truth body, and then we have only three bodies, right? The Dharmakaya, the truth body, the Rupakaya, the Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, and the Nirmanakaya, the emanation body. Sometimes
치근 노를 니요하래서 원이고 이시치고.
But this Dharmakaya, it has two aspects. And so that is what must be understood here.
단다 세계 또 많이 돼 세계 지대 타마 원이고 좋아로 그래서.
Ngoniku. Ale. I need to ask for some help here because my mind is drawing a blank for Ngoniku. Annie, do you remember Ngoniku in English?
No. Is
it nature truth body?
Let me just check it quickly.
Ngoniku champache.
So I know the difference between a nature truth body and wisdom truth body. I guess I read
Geshe
that.
chuku da ngoniku, right?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. You've got it, Iris. Yes. What we're saying is that thank you very much. Sometimes my mind just freezes. What can I say? So yes, exactly. Those are the two aspects of the truth body, the wisdom truth body and the nature truth body. So ngoniku is the nature truth body. That's what I thought, but I was doubting myself.
간년도 좋아로 근데 왔을 때 말로바 간가 정말 가지서 사소나 세계 또 많이 돼.
Yeah.
원이고 세코로 이시치고.
So what happens is when the adventitious defilements are removed, the mind becomes the wisdom truth body, and the mind's emptiness and the mind's emptiness becomes the nature truth body.
Yeah.
That when the adventitious defilements are removed, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
So that's very also much related to what we always say, that for one's own welfare, Dharmakaya, right? That's how that works. So being able to achieve one's welfare, one's own welfare, one's own purpose fully depends on the attainment of these.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Next question.
I had a question about the actual practice of the Bodhisattva confession of downfalls. And is there a distinction in the motivation for when you do Vajrasattva purification practice? Like how is this different, or how should we regard it in the practice of it?
Okay, yeah. Perna dorje sempa dang tungchak yena. Konso di adigba shayagi nyamle mindrawa ni duarwa. Konso nangla kunlong mindrawa yores dang keba di kande samlo tangres. Konso nigi nangla.
Mimi 다 대시 따도도 되지 뭐라고 뭐도 왔다. 나도 손지 손아.
Yeah.
시기다니 곧 디바시야 지레. 이제 선바인도 이제 선바 지마도 셰카 말아 왔어.
So the main difference, firstly, would be with the visualization, right? So in the case of this confession of downfalls, we visualize the 35 Buddhas of confession, whereas with Vajrasattva, we're just visualizing one figure, Vajrasattva.
하고서를 다 님비 또제 그런 거 아사니 대지 다 님원로야 다 저 짜와도 나와요 할 때는 놀라 이나 요거 라카시도 나와 먹어도.
So in terms of the power of the antidote, both are through recitation, right? But one involves recitation of names and the other involves recitation of a mantra. So that's the other significant difference between the two. 나잖아 난소디 통샷 정슈 셈베 돈바기 디바자에 기체들에 스타부치라는 시나투가 딜라테니래. 맞잖아.
말다 대도 미 그서 그 날에서 담으려 와라 놀라.
알레. 로스.
하고서 디바 조야라 디피 ngol sha chi par hes ngazojina
Yep.
amgewachi dipi la karina
Yeah.
so mengai dipi la so bata kari ji yona sha chi par wa
Niga sotugire.
Yeah.
Ale. So I asked Geshe, and I'm not sure, Annie, if this was part of your question. We often call this the Bodhisattva's confession of moral downfalls. So I was wondering if your question about it was coming like, is this related to a specific set of vows? So that's what I asked Geshe. But what Geshe said is that we mentioned the Bodhisattva's confession of moral downfalls because that's important, but actually either of these practices can purify transgressions related to different kinds of vows, to the 10 non-virtues, and so forth.
다 대도 지인이면지 여와께서 여마로 와 샤 자기 들이 두셔 신성가 시다 샤차 도제 세명과 사기 라이트 저 주고요.
But in terms of like how to practice this yourself just on the practical level, you can recite the names of the 35 Buddhas with prostrations, and you can also recite the Vajrasattva mantra with prostration. And actually both are very effective practices.
다 글로 대지 만다와께서 로시라요 말이 다 글로 디피레 다 다 센제 유주 소노도야 다 대소소소 하고 그러왔어.
And in terms of the motivation, also not necessarily a huge difference here because it's to be able to purify negativities and obscurations, hopefully connected with that aspiration to benefit sentient beings. But, these various motivations and their levels are something that we've talked about. Did that answer your question, Annie, or not really?
Yeah, yes, thank you. I was just wondering if one was covering more ground than the other.
Yeah. I
Because
wondered that too because we call it the Bodhisattva's confession of moral
yeah.
downfalls. Chik shukchewa chik shukchungalawe.
어때요?
Yeah, no. In that regard, there wouldn't be a difference.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
저절 지시다나 내가 저절 먹었다는 거다 저만도 기와 되는데 여와서.
Yeah, and Geshe said that actually it's nice to experiment with both because sometimes our mind is in like kind of more of a focus state and it's nice to visualize one figure, but sometimes we want to be really vast, right? And it can be very rich to visualize 35 figures.
다 년부터 이제 저래 대지 봐서 다또 제주대 소소 보게 랜데도 여봐도 가르리나 될로알리 바레마도 보게를 다
And also these practices are linked, of course, by the essential purification of the 4 opponent powers, right? And whether those 4 opponent powers become really significant, powerful or not, whether the powers become powerful, yeah. So that depends upon a very kind of strong regret to begin with, right? Which is also connected with our understanding and faith in cause and effect and so forth. So they also share that.
시도 가로서 강게지 바른데 가 첨부 될때는 질레가 농아스 가르치에서는 농촌 제바시에서나 근데그때는 레 디필렌다고 지요나 대요 슈처럼으로 뒤따다 가는 거 되와서 쳔보.
So one of the most important things to have mindfulness of is actually this power of regret, because it is said that if we engage in a negative action and we're able to bring forth regret immediately, merely bringing forth that regret already hinders that karma from increasing, that negative karma from increasing. So that's very important. Yes, you're welcome. Yes, whoever'd like to go next.
Good morning, Geshe. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I guess you'll say it's almost noon, but good morning. Good morning, Marta. Good morning.
My question is, I'm not clear about what is the wind of the mind, and also if is that relate in the process of the death when the dissolution of the elements, also these winds are in that dissolution? Thank you.
Yes, I got you. Nganzo di sem dang lung di ko di yapo koma sung lung serie den so konso kawa dang kandes chikyoris. Ane lung den so nganzo chiwa dang tanya po lebdu timrim gi lung den so droya di dang chikpa rebes, di dang dapo rebes.
메메 단다도 루라파도 세 라파를 질레가 침보치 와로 왔어. 다는 이마지마 갈래 되지 봐. 다만 로비 갈래 되지 그 되지 뉴르 슈 참모탄 타터자.
So Geshe-la's answer would be that the winds are the mounts of the mind that they're traveling on, but in this instance what we're talking about are the coarser winds upon which the coarser levels of consciousness operate, right? But when we speak about the death process, this is really going through the stages of dissolution and you come to more subtle winds. So it's actually a more subtle manifestation of that.
다 단다 다디 디셀랑 안조 강가 세다 참모대 그 예매네 니 근에 대반들 대어 마들가 제토야 말.
So at this moment, the subtle wind and mind for us, because our experience is dominated by the coarser winds and mind, it's like the subtle wind and mind are kind of sleeping, right? We're not really able to touch them very much.
류요 니 교한다 원래 거기 주자 토야 말에 드는 류잔다 용 토야 말했어.
Yeah. And so that very subtle wind is in this dormant state, so it's not kind of blowing, it's not able to move around, and also because of that then the subtle mind is also in that dormant state, like it's sleeping.
다때 뇨레질라 때는 너는 마도 스지게 줘야 말 손지고 줘 토야 말했어.
And like, a Buddha cannot bring those out for us. In fact, accessing this extremely subtle wind and mind is only going to be something that is possible through our own profound meditation practice.
다 타마타만 콜렉도지 거로수다 버게 세 타모지 바바가 니바마마만 로비칼라 아니 고야 슈치르대는 거 좋았어.
So what happens is, as we come to the process of death, the coarser winds have dissolved inward, and then the subtle wind, through the force of karma, right, is going to be pushed into the next incarnation, to the next lifetime, and then gradually from that the subtle wind and mind, then the coarser winds and minds become manifest, and then it's like the same story again.
단단가도 여토아리 오게 내서 나마다 대토야테 디디칼 륜로고 요아레스 류글레가 전에 세우 된도 정도 로그라스.
So it's actually said in this teaching that when we are able to like remember people, places, things, and so forth, those memories are kind of like they are carried by the winds. So that's the wind allows the mind to be carried to those memories.
예 내서라요. 다 나로서 파신 로건 지바도 되지 과대 그러was.
Yeah.
손지 되지 세다 그러니 다니 다 세다 줘요 바데.
Yeah.
손지 거로서 그 두칸가 로로 류글리자.
Yeah.
대가로로 요아르마도 건가.
룽차모디로.
다 잔다만
Yeah. So also another factor of these winds is that kind of ultimately they are formless, right? So we have this coarse body, which means that we're hindered from moving around by walls and doors and things like that. A Buddha, right, their mind, their holy body is in the nature of wind. And so because of that, they're unobstructed by things like walls. And that's one of the reasons why we can say that when we visualize the Buddhas are there. It's because of this quality of their holy bodies. And also their holy body, holy speech, and holy mind are of one essence, and so they are able to travel together. Yeah. And that's also, why that story about Asanga, when he first had the vision of Maitreya, he kind of accused him, saying, I've been basically like toiling here with great difficulty. Have you no compassion that you're only showing up now, like after 12 years? And then Maitreya was saying, actually, I've been here this whole time. Your obscurations were blocking you. And then he said all of the things that he did since the very beginning of his retreat. But the main key here is that the subtle wind. And so Marta, also, when we say wind, right, or lung, this is also, it's the Tibetan translation lung is of the Sanskrit prana, which is kind of more like an energy, right? So you can also think of it like that. That might be helpful. Lungseri di nupa dabo chikla tenerwa de semde.
야, 나도 타마 다 미야 샤와샤만 로비카 차 누가 베마토아.
알레.
샤와샤만 로비카라
야.
사이 유하게 니반
야.
요.
야.
아니 전요. 타마는 루이사는 루뇨 그랬더니 다바 타마서만 로버스.
So it's connected with the elements in how we talk about it, Geshe said, and that's related to the stages of dissolution that occur before we go to the next life. The earth dissolves into water, dissolves into fire, and finally dissolves into wind. The wind is the subtlest element.
하고서 다 때미요. 다다 루글레 같이 또 간주 때에서 다 시원하고 왔다다.
Yeah, so that's how the winds are sort of functioning. That's how the winds are sort of functioning.
Yeah.
So next question?
There's several coming in through Facebook and YouTube. So,
Okay.
Probably the most interesting one is more of a request that may take some time, but is it possible for Geshe to teach further on karma? Like, how does karma arise? Where is it stored? How does purification of karma take place? I think Geshe talked a little bit about this today, but yeah, there's a question like that.
Okay, yeah, no, I'll put that to Geshe. So, nganso di ledre gi korla di roa. Tene Geshe maumbala sungshinang la ledre tits Sūtra chene treshi jaya yeres ane ledre gi yongsa dang kandestro gi yeres dang dela tene di bajang yang yaboko gi doa.
기보용 그래서 가서 나와니레니레 다 지지줘야 그래서
So Geshe said this in-depth explanation of karma will come, because after we finish this module, we're actually going to be looking at these great texts of Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, including Lamrim. And in there, we have a very extensive discussion of karma. So it will come.
지보용
Yeah, and before too long, Geshe said. So this presentation will come.
Okay, there's two more, but let Carol go next.
Carol, go ahead. Yep.
Hello. Thank
Hi.
you very much. I have two questions. One's just about the 35 Confessions Buddhas, and the other is about Sangha and relationships. Which shall I do first?
Whichever one you prefer.
Okay. How far is worrying about our relationships with Sangha, especially Vajra brothers and sisters, a worldly concern?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So nganso perna nganso di chutruk gi parsu gi jawa yore chikroa. Tene nganso chutruk dang gendunpa parsu gi jelwa kola semchel langya di dorje pun so da buchik samlo thana semchel langya di jigten chögye dang Drawa yores yomares di jigtengi samlo thang yerebes nganso dorje pun dang chotrok dang denso kola semtre mambo langire dua di abo droma sons nganso drawa yapo menduas dende samlo thang yedi jigten chöge dang drawa gi samlo thang yerebes
다 대지티 지제돈
jigtengi samlo thang
말을 다때 야가 놓아야지 다 쪼야가 왔어 다요 오다테 먹이 따서 야보 말에 나와서는 또나 이때 지지 쉴때 로야때 쪼 야보래 왔어.
So Geshe would say mainly this is good if we are concerned about maintaining a positive relationship with the Dharma friends and the Vajra siblings. But where it would be considered a worldly concern is if you wonder something like, well, how do they see me? How are they seeing me? If that's a big part of it, then it would be veering into worldly concern.
미시 이전에 겨울에 대 야보를 했어도 오 단체 대 조모면 야보면 선수 쉬나 대 선수 야보지랬어.
But just to be clear, to think, like, oh, I don't maybe have a good relationship with some of the Vajra siblings or some of the Dharma friends at the moment, maybe that's something I want to work on. That would generally be a very positive thing.
다 뒤돌아 다대 야보면 뭐지한다 다살 야보면 손으로 또는 지대 지제 대에서 그랬더니 겨와도 했어.
And so you might think, well, okay, if I have like crummy relationships with all of my Dharma friends. That never happens in the Dharma Center, right? So if I have crummy relationships with my Dharma friends, then maybe other people are going to look at me and they're going to think, what a lousy Buddhist you are. So that is kind of an element of a worldly concern, but that might even be something helpful at the end of the day in terms of those relationships. But generally, like, to completely kind of separate that concern from worldly considerations is something that is very difficult, because the holy beings even say, like, even for highly elevated beings, attachment to reputation, for example, is very hard to abandon. But generally, if the thrust of this concern about these relationships is like, I'm not really getting along with these folks in the way that, like, I would hope to, that is probably a virtuous thing, Geshe would say. Yeah. Want to do your other question, Carol? You had another one too.
That was such a good answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The other one is just a kind of, I just had this feeling looking at the wonderful paintings, that why are there no female Buddhas in this? Because but there's a whole row of dakinis, female dakinis at the bottom, like, looking at, offerings and kind of, so I just kind of wanted to know, really, because we do have female Buddhas, and why aren't they there?
Why aren't they in the 35?
And wouldn't we have karma with beings with female bodies and things? I don't know. It's just
no. Like, if you were purifying karma related to, like, harm to women, for example, why wouldn't the being to purify that be female? Kind of, is that like your line of reasoning?
It's kind of mixed in there, a kind of question about the whole thing. Thank you.
Yep. Yes, no problem. And the sangye so sumshiso gegi nanglola. Sumshiso sorry. Sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me today. Sumshiso nanglola pume chikyang mendus. Di kare chesons karin sena di tanka ningjebo nanglola deni pumo kashi yeri ne konso chasang o chupa pulia gi lamo chikres konso tama dabo chikre doa yokpo dabo chiki ne perna nganso digpile chik pumo tongchung cheala tene yongi yeres dene digpile di dabo yena dene dipa jangya gi ladi pumo gi nampa tena So Geshe said, in this case, you could purify with Yabyum Vajrasattva, Vajrasattva father and mother, which are both equally prominent, and of course one in female aspect, or you could purify with the names and recitations of the 21 taras. Or if you're a Vajrayogini practitioner, for example, you could purify with the recitation and visualization of Vajrayogini. So Geshe said, like in the 21 taras, there's not even one single man, right? So in this way, he thinks the 21 taras are kind of like this strong feminist expression of enlightenment, right? So the female there is very prominent. Yeah. And Geshe said also, he had someone say to him, you always talk about mother sentient beings, but what about father sentient beings, right? So mother sentient beings are prominent. Yeah. So yeah. De la pumo mendua. Yeah. So Geshe says, like, they are. It's true that is a lacking here, and he can't really say what the reason for that is, but in the sutras, those negativities are purified by those forms. But yes, it is a lack here. Yes, yeah. But despite maybe the male aspect of this practice, what Geshe would remind you all is not to let that fashion the mind towards some kind of denigration of women or like women are not important, because we know, those of us who are Vajrayogini practitioners, those of us who are tantric practitioners, that women are equally capable beings, and looking down on them is actually considered a serious transgression. So he would leave it with that.
대치 본말이 나로서 린드가 로체는 파 마저아니라. 야 다실로 둬야 돼. 다 다시 놓게 돼. 난 좀 이거 달마도 요 말했어.
Alleluia. And if we speak of the Vajrayogini practice in particular, which is the practice of a female deity, this is the only tantric practice where the deity is sufficiently powerful to bring us in this body, in this lifetime, in this corporeal form, directly to a Pure Land herself. It is only the female Buddha Vajrayogini who's capable of doing that. And also to remember that this extraordinary, unparalleled method was spoken by Vajrayogini, a female deity herself. It is spoken by the main deity, the main female deity of the mandala, in the case of Vajrayogini. Yes, yeah. And similarly with Tilopa and Naropa, often it's retinue deities, right, that are sharing the teachings of a specific yidam. But Vajrayogini, due to her unparalleled power and compassion, she whispered the instructions to them herself. And similarly, we speak of the Mayum, right, which are the most important sutras. The Prajna Paramita sutras are spoken of as the mother. So the feminine, the mother, is very important. Yeah, so Geshe said, like, he thinks, he understands how this could be discouraging, but also if you think about those other instances, that might also be encouraging. Yeah. And he thinks that there is a very specific intention to protect the dignity of women, specifically in Vajrayana, because the tantric vows specifically mention not denigrating women. They don't speak of not denigrating men, right? From the point of view of reaching the enlightenment of Vajrayana, there is absolutely no difference between the practitioner in female form or the practitioner in male form. This is very important to understand. Yeah. So it's absolutely the same in terms of what can be achieved. So did that answer your question, Carol, more or less, or not really?
That's a totally brilliant answer that should be framed somewhere.
You liked it? Okay, good. No, I hope, because I think Geshe wanted to be encouraging.
No, please say that to
Yeah. Ko shebo gasun ko tsikpa gang la tsik den so jargi yorisa. Geshe said, like, it's amazing the things that some of these enlightened beings did for women. Think about it in her time. Venerable Tara saying she was going to come back again and again as a woman and to free all sentient beings and lead them to enlightenment. That's like actually really incredible. And it's not just that she became enlightened as a deity in female form. It's that she started her practice as a woman, and she reached the fruition of that practice as a woman and manifested as a woman.
Okay,
so I think, is there any other questions?
Yes.
Go ahead, Dave.
Two more. So one of them is, are the 35 Confession Buddhas part of the Gelugpa merit field?
Okay. Sangye sumso nga geluk gitsokshin nangla yorebesa. So Geshe thinks usually not. There may be, there's different merit fields, right? There may be exceptions, but he thinks usually not. But you certainly could visualize them as part of the merit field. But in the explanations of the merit field that he's seen, they are not mentioned, no. But he said that they could be put there by some masters, maybe. But when we look at the merit field, we can think the essence of those 35 Buddhas is there. And similarly, you know, in the depiction of the merit field or the field of accumulation, we don't even have all of the yidams, right? There's many yidams that are widely practiced that are not included in that visualization. Yeah. But you can put these beings in your own fields of accumulation to visualize if you like. The only thing that you shouldn't put in there are worldly protectors, right? Protectors that are not enlightened. Everything else you can put in. Next one, Dave?
Yes. We have here. Yeah, well, I've got to go find it again, pardon me, so I can read it properly. I have been studying Buddhism since 2 years at university, and on my own, I'm really eager to learn about tantric practices. How should one get started?
Okay. Ta midi ko university touring robtra nangsha kola lo ni jangswa ko doje tekpa di sheda nyamlin chening jogidus. Doje tepa nyamlin che gido boyana kandes ko tsuguresa.
다 rumba tombo tel ta un to kares. Ani ngi ta shonju sel ta to tumani de shem ngi shonju sel to tumani no to ja shu to yo kares.
So in terms of the entry to the Vajrayana, it is through abhisheka, through empowerment. And for that empowerment to be rooted and effective, then the aspirant should have trained in bodhicitta and wisdom realizing emptiness. This is really important. But absolutely necessary to achieve empowerment before engaging in tantric practice. You can think of the empowerment as being like the visa that allows you entry into a country. So like, for example, if we wanted to go to India, for example, you can't just show up, right? You need to apply for a visa first. So it's exactly like that. So the empowerment is actually the permission to engage in the practice. So the door to Tantra is empowerment, and we could say the door to the path to that empowerment, or to the empowerment taking, is the generation of bodhicitta, that altruistic intention. But do you need to have realized bodhicitta before receiving an empowerment? No, right? But we should have trained in it. And how the mind is at the time of empowerment is very important. If there's no feeling in the mind, if the mind is disturbed at the time of the empowerment, you don't receive the empowerment. That's very clear, right? And so to prepare the mind to be receptive, training in emptiness and especially bodhicitta is really important. We need to be able to receive. So that's the first, that would be what he would suggest. Yeah. Is that everything, Dave?
I think so, yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I guess we'll leave it here. Thank you, everybody. Remember, next Sunday, there's not going to be a teaching, but on the Saturday, there will be the Bodhisattva vows and Tara for those who are interested. Thanks so much.
Yeah, too.